In the past year, I've done about 100 color and light studies to learn about painting convincing light for my characters and environments, through which I improved a lot of things that you can apply practically to any type of art you produce. This video will be a summary of how I went about studying color and light and some of the things I learned about these exercises. But before we start, I have to credit Marco Bucci and especially Lighting Mentor, as these exercises and most of what I learned are very much inspired or taken directly from their content, but I'll try to explain them through my experience and in a much more condensed way. However, if you're interested in more color and light content, definitely check out these two. For your study to be as effective and efficient as possible, we need to understand what our goals are, to adjust the studies to the goal. For me, it was to be able to draw nice backgrounds for my character art, but I realize now that that wasn't the only thing I improved at while drawing these studies. Most importantly, I started to develop an intuition for how light works and what colors actually feel right. So now when painting, I can often tell what's wrong with the lighting, and I can produce much more interesting pieces that way. Another thing that I didn't expect to improve at is the technical skill of painting. As a beginner, my paintings used to feel very stiff, but now I instinctively know to let go and I feel my hand flowing when I'm painting, which really improved the expressiveness of my brushstrokes. This only came to me because I did so many color and light studies. So if any of this sounds like a goal you have, then these exercises will most definitely help. If those aren't exactly your goals, then you can tweak the exercises accordingly. Now to the exercises. This is by far one of my favorite art exercises, and it's very simple. You take a picture with interesting light and try to draw the essence of the light hitting the subject by copying it with intention. Your reference can be still life, it can be an environment, it can be a person, whatever interests you. However, I do recommend you do a variety of subjects unless you really know that you want to draw only one thing. These references can also be from real life or other artists. However, you need to be careful when copying others' work, as it can quickly become unethical. I personally don't post these studies on social media, however I am showing them now as an example. If you do post it, then at least make sure to credit the artist somewhere. For this exercise, depending on your goal, I recommend you put limitations to practice effectively. If you're looking to improve at seeing colors correctly, then I highly advise you not to color pick from the reference. This will force you to think about the actual colors of the image, which are often very far from what you'd expect them to be. Take a look at this illustration for example. If I asked you what color the shadows of the mountains are, you'd probably say blue, but they're actually also red, just very desaturated. But relative to the other very saturated reds, even a desaturated red becomes a cold color. If you color pick, you won't be able to learn about how light interacts with the subject, and it will become much more of a technical study rather than a color study. You can pick colors from your canvas though. That's totally fine. I sometimes get frustrated with being unable to figure out the right color, so I end up color picking. If you can relate to this, then I have two strategies that could help you avoid doing that. The first is choosing a color and then painting it over the reference to compare, and then adjusting the color accordingly. This way, you'll know why your colors were wrong, without having to color pick, and you'll end up with a nice looking image. Another way is to actually paint traditionally, which was way harder than I expected, since I actually had to mix the colors too. But with a few painting classes, I started to get the hang of it. The advantage of taking this learning path called acrylic painting as an absolute beginner was the clear structure, through which I learned the technicalities of using traditional paint and applying it. These classes were available on Skillshare, the largest online learning community for creatives, with many classes led by pros and covering many creative fields, such as painting, illustration, film, and many others. And with the structure of learning paths, you can start getting closer to your creative goals, whether you're a beginner or a professional. The first 500 people to use my link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Get started today. Thanks to Skillshare for sponsoring my video again. Without them, I wouldn't be able to make videos like this, so many thanks again. For this level, I personally set the goal to do studies daily, but I failed miserably. So although I do recommend that you do the same, don't be discouraged if you are not able to. Also, I prefer working on one layer so I don't have to think too much about layering and other technical stuff. You can tweak those limitations depending on your goal. So for example, if you're only practicing technical skill of painting, then you can color pick from the reference. But now that we have a reference and our limitations, let me take you through my process of painting the study. I always like to start with a background color, so my eyes can adjust to color relativity. Next, I start working in some big shapes to determine where the elements will be located on the canvas. One thing you'll notice is that I don't pay much attention to getting the proportions and positions perfectly right, as it isn't my goal for this study. But it's definitely something you can do to improve your observation skills further. After putting down big shapes, I start going smaller and build in the details. And I do that for basically the rest of the study until I'm satisfied or my timer runs out, which was 1 hour in this case. You can see that when zoomed in, this piece looks pretty unfinished and honestly somewhat bad, but from afar it starts looking quite realistic. This is because I didn't go too much into detail, but I got the overall shapes and colors right. I want to stress that there is no right or wrong. If you would like your painting to look finished, then you can go in and paint all the little details. However, if you want to practice light and color efficiently, then you don't have to spend too long on a piece to get all the little things right. I like to limit the time I have to 1 hour, so I actually focus on the important aspects rather than the details. Kind of like what people recommend you do in gesture drawing, so you can only focus on the line of action, for example. Once you get the hang of this study, you can start trying to do them faster. In 30 minutes, then in 15 minutes. And once you're comfortable with that, we can move on to the next level. Now that you have the basics of light down, it's time to try to apply the light without directly copying an image. You will have to think about not only how light works, but how it interacts with different subjects. Basically, you're trying to understand and see the essence of that light and what it's doing and applying it to something new. But to eliminate the hurdle of having to draw something amazing every time, we will be recoloring existing art. For this, you want to have line art or a sketch to color. You can use your old drawings, line art you find online, or traced line art of a photograph or an illustration. But again, be careful with crediting the artist or just using it for practice without sharing it online. Now you need to find an image with the type of lighting you'd like to apply to your line art. So for my study, you can see that I traced the line art of this frame from Freerain and tried to apply the lighting of those two illustrations by Can Liu onto this drawing. One thing you need to keep in mind are the values when working on this study, as the values can really make or break the study. This was only a study about color and light, so again it was a really quick one without getting too onto the details. It only took me about 20 minutes, but it gets the idea across pretty well. I'm honestly still pretty new to this exercise, so I have very little examples to show, and I kind of suck at it, but I can definitely tell that I'm improving. This part of the video is honestly just my speculation, so take this with a grain of salt. I personally feel like even if you have very good light and color knowledge, you still have to get better at brushwork and breaking the rules. I'm very new to this concept, but when I look at my studies and compare them to actual masters, I often notice that not only is their understanding of color and light better, but also their use of brushes. One artist that comes to mind when thinking about this concept is Dino. You can really see the brush strokes in his work, and it gives his paintings a certain aesthetic that you cannot replicate with hard brushes without texture. And I honestly think that this is what makes the difference. This is also the reason why I'm unable to study Dino despite the many requests. I'm just not at the level where I can do that yet. Another thing I see pro artists do is breaking the rules of light in a way that makes an image more appealing, like artists who draw in the hyper-pop style. For example, look at how Yuming Lee paints his light. It's not exactly what you'd see in real life, yet it's incredibly beautiful, beyond what copying reality can do. I'm not saying that you have to draw like this, but what I am saying is that this is an example of how you can push the limits of how light works in favor of an interesting and more appealing picture. I don't have a way to practice this, as I am not at this level yet, and I don't see many people talk about these concepts on YouTube, but it will take you at least a year or two to get here if you're a beginner. So for now, I recommend you just practice the level 1 and 2 exercises. And in the future, when I actually get good at this, I will make a video documenting how I went about it. There are many ways to improve your light and color, but I found that the way I do it was very fun and effective, so I thought I'd share it on here. I'm also really interested in making more light and color videos, but it's a skill I still have to grow in before I can teach it. So for now, I hope you enjoyed and could take away something from this video. If you're interested in learning how to apply your knowledge of light to good composition, then consider watching my last 2 videos. Lastly, if you have any questions or would like to share some feedback with me, feel free to ask me in the comments or message me directly. I'm always happy to help. With that being said, thank you for watching until the end, I really appreciate it. And I wish you a peaceful rest of the day. Take care.